we have the next session coming up where we will explore chatbots in higher education. This time we have Dr. Wayne Holmes with us, who will be hosting this session with a special focus on the ethical considerations of chatbots. Let's see if we have all the guest speakers here. Wayne, are you here? Can you unmute yourself? We also have Myles Blaney. Are you here? Or perhaps you should say estoy, as the Spanish students. We have.
I'm here, Lars.
Great, Myles. Do we have Chris here? Do we have Chris here from Lancaster? Anyway, I don't see the attendance list right now. We live in a strange world. Personally, I got a call and a last-minute vaccine shot. So during JJ's presentation, I just got vaccinated. And that's why you might hear some noise here in the background. So I apologize for that, but I'm happy to be able to keep hosting the conference meanwhile. I'm really excited to have the chance of welcoming Dr. Wayne Holmes here. He's a UNESCO consultant on the topic of AI in education. So I think there's a lot of things we can learn from that. So welcome, Wayne.
Thank you very much, Lars. Yeah, it's a great conference. I think this is a really timely focus on chatbots. They're getting increasing in number and increasing in complexity. So I think this is a very opportune moment. If I may, I'll share my screen. Just have to work how to do this on this system. Okay. So hopefully you can see my PowerPoint slide. Okay, great. I get to see it as well. That's fantastic. Okay. Okay, so as Lars said, my role is, well, it's threefold at the moment. Firstly, I teach education and technology at University College London. Excuse me. Secondly, I'm a research consultant for UNESCO, where I focus on the application of AI and education. And I'm also a member of the Education Science Committee of the International Research Centre for AI. So in this session, we have two guests joining us, and we're going to be looking at their experiences and talking about it in the context of the ethics of these issues. So I'm going to begin with just a very short presentation, but before I do, I'm going to hand over to Myles and Chris just to say hi, because I think it's quite useful for them, for you all to see them before we start, rather than waiting for them to appear later on. So I'm going to stop sharing briefly. So Chris, are you here? Can you introduce yourself? No answer was the stern reply.
I can't see Chris here, so might have some technical issues. I don't know, but let's see if we can go ahead without him, or he might join in any minute.
Sure. Okay. Well, perhaps you could send him the link to the window, because
I've done that again.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Brilliant. Well, in that case, Myles, over to you. Would you care to just introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll crack on?
Hi, everybody. I'm Myles Blaney. I'm a Senior Learning Technology Service Manager at the University of Edinburgh. And I've been working on looking at new technologies and how we can introduce them to expand or augment the teacher experience and teacher function within education. So within the University of Edinburgh, we've been looking at learning analytics and AI and automation, and seeing how we could use those with online courses for the delivery of education via MOOC platforms. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Myles. Okay, so I'll go back to sharing my screen. Okay, right, so we're looking at Edubots in higher education, and we're going to look at some of the ethical issues. So I'm just going to summarize now. A lot of you have been involved in this world for a while, so none of this will be huge surprise to you, but I think it's worthwhile just giving a brief context. So to begin with, the project that I'm showing on the screen at the moment is called Admins, which I was part of at the Open University in the UK, the online university in the UK that's been around for a long time. And what's interesting about the OU is that it has a large proportion, larger than most universities, of people who have disabilities. So we developed this chatbot to engage with the students to help them tell the university about their disabilities. Before this chatbot was developed, it was just down to them filling in an online form. And so the idea of the chatbot was to make that process easier. Second example I want to show is this one. This is called Ada. This one is from a small kind of community college in the north west of the UK called Bolton College. And they've been running this now for at least 3 years. And the amount of data they've collected and the range of different issues that it can address for students is quite impressive. And they've also opened this out. They call it First Pass. And the idea is that a college or an institution or a school elsewhere can just buy into the overarching hardware or software, so the structure, the framework, and then but populate it for things that are relevant to their university space. The third one I wanted to mention is this Genie from Australia, and this has been around for a while as well, and is pretty impressive, and the kind of conversations that take place. And again, it's been developing over time. Now, I want to make a bit of a change here to go a little bit wider afield than this, and that's to talk about Google's Lambda, which was launched just a couple of weeks ago. Now, if you saw this, you would have noted that it's actually it's incredibly impressive. The example that was given was a conversation about the solar system, or I think the moons of Pluto or something. Anyway, but the point was, it was a conversation. So unlike most existing chatbot approaches where it's a question and answer, new question and answer, new question and answer, and no relationship between them, with Lambda, this technology, Google's arguing that it is a continuing conversation, which was pretty impressive to watch. It's available on YouTube if you want to have a look at that. But although it was impressive, I just want to remind you of Google's announcement a couple of years earlier of Duplex, which was their conversational agent system that was used to make bookings at in a hairdresser's or a restaurant. And it turned out that once this was made available, actually it wasn't quite as impressive as everybody thought it was. Moving on to another completely sideways thing, this is a chatbot that's been developed for helping people, not just in education, but more broadly with mental health issues. And I thought this is quite interesting because of the way in which humans sometimes can be more prepared to share intimate details of their life and their beliefs and their concerns with a robot, with a chatbot piece of software than there are with other humans. And so it just opened up a completely different perspective on the way that these things can work. So with that as a kind of a context, I just want to move on then to think about just 2 or 3 quite brief references to the ways in which chatbots, raise some quite challenging issues. So to begin with, now this might be a little bit of a provocative approach, but anyway, the history of chatbots, most of you know about this, but we have things like Google Tay, Baby Q from China, Rena from Japan, and Luda from Korea. Now, the first thing to note, and this is one of the ethical issues that we must take account of, and we must address and prevent, is that 3 of these, and you can go further, you can think about Siri on your phone or Alexa in your living room, and many other examples, but they are instantiated as females. So the assistant becomes a female. The female is the assistant is subordinate to us who's using the system, and the point is that this female personification is put into this particular position. Now, I accept, without question, that some chatbots, they have a variety of options, and you can choose the gender, if you like, of the chatbot. But nevertheless, the female chatbots are really, really, well, without doubt, the most common. Now, that's one aspect of these chatbots then, that they are personified in the form of a female. However, with these particular ones, and these are chatbots that are learning chatbots, so they're not completely pre-programmed. They went out and they learned from the data that they were given, and quite quickly they went a bit crazy. So Tay was famous for giving out racist and sexist comments. Baby Q was doing defamation of government ministers as it happened. Arena actually professed a love for Adolf Hitler, and Luda was giving out offensive comments about disability and homosexuality. So, this is not to criticize chatbots per se, but it's to recognize that this technology is not straightforward, and that it's really easy to go down a road where things like this become all too common. Moving on then to my final example, and that is using systems like this, chatbots, via the Alexa Echo, which is happening a great deal in lots of universities around the world, where in the student residential homes, these systems are being put there. Now, like so many applications of AI in education, the intentions are completely honorable. The ambition is to ensure that the students have more access to the information that they need so that they can take more advantage of their teaching and learning setting. And the reality is, though, that these systems, however you look at it, they can also be used in a negative back to front kind of way. And they're just part of an overarching set of systems where students' access to rooms or students' access to computers, to libraries, what they do on the online systems are all tracked. Again, the intention is to be supportive, but as one writer put it at Stoker Walker in 2020, these systems represent a new low in intrusive technology, breaching students' privacy on a massive scale. The tracking systems will infantilize students, further train them to see surveillance as a normal part of living, whether they like it or not. So in short, the problem with these types of technologies is that they are, whether we like it or not, they have surveillance overtones. And these are the kinds of things that we really need to be very aware of. So other issues that we might think about when we think about chatbots are issues of trust, transparency, fairness, privacy, the list goes on and on. Okay, but for this session today, that's all I want to speak about. I just wanted to raise some issues to give a kind of a context for our discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. And I'm going to move back. So let's just find out. Has Chris managed to join us? I assume.
We haven't heard from Chris here, so
Okay, so I've got
we don't have any news.
Only half an hour ago or thereabouts. So, okay. So Myles, we're going to turn the program around, and it's over to you. So, yeah. So I'll hand over to Myles, and thank you very much.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, and I'll kick off. So I think the points that just been raised are really interesting, and I'll touch on some of them in this conversation. What I'm going to be doing is just kind of flagging that this is from the work that the University of Edinburgh has conducted into looking at aspects of automation and AI in delivery of at-scale teaching, with the focus on online teaching initially, but we kind of pivoted and changed that kind of work to on campus and online. So the first thing I think I want to address is that we are in what we define as a post-digital era, where previously we talk about digital technology being something new and fanciful that was over there, and teaching was over here. And I think now we're maybe a bit beyond that, especially with the pandemic as well. So digital is a bit of the norm. The example here I have got is Kit from Knight Rider, showing my age. And Kit's the car that can talk to you. Well, my car talks to me now. And in California, your car can drive you about. And in the UK, cars can assist you in driving as well. So we're seeing digital technology embed itself in everyday life. However, we're seeing that usually education, the sector is a bit slow to embrace it, but with certain aspects of digital technology for numerous reasons. But the pandemic might have helped push that to get people to embrace digital technology, force them to embrace it might be the word I might want to use there. And I think there's a wider reviewing of how teaching is done, and how digital technology can be integrated into that to maybe augment or expand that teacher function, and in some cases replace certain aspects of it as well. And touch on the point that Wayne just kind of flagged there as well. I think we're seeing the normalization of deification of technology, not just in society where our clicks are counted and our Alexas, our voices, our photographs are tagged and categorized, but it's also creeping into campus and student lives, where we're seeing examples of, I think I was speaking to a vendor who's before the pandemic was working on a facial recognition bot for a university in the UK for around campus. So I think there are interesting realms we're living in right now, but I think chatbots are, part of that conversation. And what is the focus sometimes is the focus on the technology. I think when you say automation, you might get slight panic and connotations of replacement in teaching. And I think today, obviously we cover numerous interpretations and potential use cases which reflect diversity in pedagogical, ideological, technological concepts and ideas of automation, bots, and AI. I think there's numerous perspectives of it. And if you look at education, if I look at the University of Edinburgh and compare it to the universities or institutions in Scotland, I always kind of go back to the adoption of these technologies is always differs depending on the institution. And I think in the previous presenter, and JJ kind of talked about that a wee bit, about for my case, the VLEs, how a virtual learning environment or learning management system is adopted is always different across institutions by style, how it's taught, language, and things like that. And I think we'll see the same for bots in the longer term. But I think the focus being on that technology, sometimes it can be a bit of a hype train, and there should be some concerns regarding is there a race to adopt what might cause issues or bad practices and bad design into everyday teaching or adoption of bots. And I think there's a quote here that I've got from Neil Selwyn's book regarding technological solutionism, which is from Evgeny Morozov, and believe that digital technology offers a ready-made problem-solving infrastructure that is capable of tackling complex social problems. And you can say that for education. You know, the tech will fix it. Well, will the tech actually fix it at all? And you know, thinking an example of how technology and AI has been adopted during this pandemic is online proctoring, and you're thinking about the ethical backlash that we're seeing now for online proctoring and adoption in education. And ironically, I was giving a talk about this 2 hours ago to Old Scotland, the concerns about automation and AI, that and the kind of the user experience as well. So I think there might be, yet again, sometimes there's a focus on the technology to adopt, but maybe there's not that kind of focus on why we're adopting it and what we're trying to, are we trying to fix something? And just to say that this is the image that's on the slide right now is actually, it's been created by AI, and it's based on the brushstrokes of the Renaissance painter Raphael. You know, in a weird way to think about it, the AI probably, if it's commissioned to do it, it's probably a lot more cheaper than getting Raphael to do it. So thinking about that into the how we adopt AI and bots into education, you know, could there be the argument for a two-tier system with the human experience offered as the premium option, the automated driven teaching as the budget option, you know, basically billing teachers per hour. And that comes down to, I think it's really interesting what we're saying about fairness and trust is about the values of the institution that adopts these technologies as well, and how they see them, you know, as in their institutional wide values. I'm just going to quote a line from one of my colleagues' papers, which I'll give links to at the end of this chat. It's Michael Gallagher and Marcus Brains, and they've said this great line that I like is, marrying its increasingly technocratic discourse, such much of the focus and implementation of educational technologies in higher education is about the generating high volume teaching. And that's it. It's high volume teaching, and to be able to facilitate that high volume teaching. And yet again, it's questionable why we're trying to do that. I'll just skip on now. So what about students in this space? And yet again, I say that part of the project that we have a great digital education school with some great thinkers in there, like Shannon Bain and Michael Gallagher and Ben Williamson, who are heavily involved in this space. I think Shannon Bain wrote a paper about the original teacher bot in 2014, where they did a pilot of bots in teaching, and thinking about, you know, what about students in this space? Students always want to have, you know, human physical contact with staff, and can that be replaced by? It's interesting hearing about people talking about bots where people get emotionally tied to, you know, and have, you know, conversations, anonymous conversations, and I can see that anonymous conversations for students could be really, really interesting. And we've seen use cases come out from speaking to students where they feel more comfortable asking questions to a bot, maybe about some specific subject matters, than asking in front of a classroom or asking their peers just because of judgment. And I think that's a really interesting use case. But I think reverting back to the physical and digital, I think we're seeing now post-pandemic a kind of students maybe wanting to have a bit of a blend, but more of a demand for a physical campus is probably coming back after their digital fun for the last 15, 16 months. But it's their user experience that we need to really think about. You know, virtual assistants providing nudges and recommendations and advice. You know, that example of like a proactive bot, going back to JJ's talk and reactive, that proactive bot, which would, you know, base everything off data, you know, we're dipping into the learning analytics realm there of data-based algorithms created by who, managed by who, or do the academics have controls? Are they building these? And are those nudges for everybody, and how are they tailored, and the language in those as well, and the impact that they can have? And then thinking about, you know, of like adaptive learning kind of style where, you know, based on your experience, learning is adjusted to you to meet your requirements, and having all the data to build that full picture about that as well. So student experience has to be core to everything. And, you know, FAQs, peer-to-peer support are really good use cases of that, but we have to make sure that we understand what students actually want, and there has to be conversations with students because they have to be co-creators in the creation of any kind of concepts of bots to be adopted in education. There has to be UX design research, familiarity and integrations is key as well, harping on what JJ said. Students don't want to have one experience here and another experience there. They need to be able to jump in and be able to use the tools and feel familiar with them, and don't feel like it's something they don't want to use. That we see, trying to introduce new systems is always kind of regarded as slightly toxic because there's something else to learn. And what about staff and teachers? I always kind of argue that bots and automation sometimes are a bit like the supersuit that allows you to identify tasks and perform them at scale. Like the images of Ripley from Aliens in the robot suit, and she can lift heavy things and beat up Queen Aliens. It's pretty awesome. But I think thinking about how bots and automation can, allow the academics to expand what they can do at scale and perform maybe high volume, low stake tasks en masse. I think that's going back to the FAQ questions about, class schedules and I can't do this. That's real value. And yet again, teachers have to be, or academics have to be co-creators and managers of this content and the bots themselves. But, the concern at the same time that we've seen from academics is, will they just become observers and monitors of that journey and not the facilitators of it if they provide all their information to this bot? Are they subservient to it now? And it's, yet again, another line that I like from Neil Selwyn's book is human and professionals, about just academics' roles just becoming diluted by this as well. And it kind of comes back to the values of the institution and what we quantify as teaching. So I think from staff, what we've heard from staff is that they're very keen on to focus on high volume, low impact. And what was done at the university is, going out and looking at that timeline from a student journey, really, and exploring possible use cases of where bots could be used. And I think that was it Masterbot or bot leader in the previous presentation. But is there one bot to rule them all? I personally think there's probably not. There's lots of different bots, but that raises the questions about standards and guidance and language and tone and all those things, which is different. And people creating and managing those tones and languages sometimes maybe isn't the best. Maybe they need some support on it. I'm rounding off. One thing I'll say is that the University of Edinburgh did a lot of work with speaking to staff and students to try and create use cases that we could try and implement. And a few of them were like an onboarding bot, which is a pre-arrival knowledge check bot, to try and get students to, if they're like doing like a Maths 101 course, to try and gauge their knowledge and offer them support if they didn't answer certain questions correctly, but also supply that information to the academics so they can know about the class coming in and where they are, and so they could tailor those first few lessons around certain subject matters which they see as lacking. We have personal tutor bots which were scoped, allowing for appointments to be booked and prompting students for information for the personal tutor appointments to make them more useful, and allow students to reflect on those meetings prior to those meetings, and making sure the personal tutors had all the information they needed prior to them as well, to make that contact time as useful as it could be. And then we have reflective process bots which would guide users through a process to allow them to self-reflect on the learning and development through their journey. And we find some subject matters that really do use process bots in medicine heavily, which would be really useful to kind of help students gain more and better knowledge and understanding. But yet again, it's about the role of bots in this space. Are they there to stimulate and provoke students to reflect and review on things? I think, going back to TeacherBot 2015 from Shannon Bain, it was a bot that would just insert random quotes into discussion posts from students on Twitter, and it actually provoked them to think about certain subjects and get them to then talk between themselves within the peer network And that's all it did. It didn't provide an answer. It didn't provide a statement. It just provided a quote. And then students would actually go off and have a discussion regarding that quote. And the bot would then maybe interject with another quote. And I think that's a great example of a bot which we kind of like at the university. Right now, we're kind of a bit more scared of bots that give answers for subject matter questions. And my last slide is just to say, I think the work that has been done at the university is really down to Michael Gallagher, Marcus Brains, and I've just that's some of the links of some of the stuff that they have done, but they have been pretty awesome in doing the research, and that's me done. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you very much, Myles. But as far as I can see, we still haven't been joined by Chris. My concern is I think this could be a time zone issue.
I'm a bit unsure what happened for Chris there, but yeah, we've got to be a bit flexible here and adjust the format a little bit, I suppose. But either we prolong the time for a Q&A and discussion here, or if there's any volunteers, anyone that have any interesting experiences here from our 50 or so participants, there might be an open slot. So if anyone, let's have a call to the participants to see if there's any contributions.
I'd like to start with a couple of questions for Myles that I've got. But if anybody else has questions, we've got a couple of comments in the chat. So I'll call on both Katja and John, see if they would like to speak in this session. But firstly, Myles, one of the things that you started with was positing that chatbots and allied technologies could, I think you said, augment, expand, replace humans. So, this is obviously quite a tricky area. So I wonder if you could just expand on, if you could give us some examples of ways in which these technologies might do one of those three things, or...
Yeah, sure. And I think the focus really is on the augment and expand. The function replaces, is something I'll talk at the end. So I think for us, for augmenting and expanding the function of academics or even professional service staff to be able to deal with questions and queries 24/7, 365 is an example of being able to do that. Being able to offer for an online experience, anyways, what we were focused on 2 years ago was trying to think about the audience and where it would be, and how we could facilitate that if people were logging on out with the supported teaching hours, then how could they interact with something or somebody to ask a basic question. And so it's trying to think about whether a bot could be able to be used to host certain very low stakes questions about maybe a subject or maybe just about support. So I'd say when we're talking about augmenting and expanding that, it's in that place. And I think replace is so going back to my car that drives, my first slide. So you could argue that with the way technology is moving right now, there's driverless cars will probably happen at the very end of my lifetime, maybe. But it is something that will replace the driver. And so there's concerns about, the adoption of bots and aspects of automation education about what they could be used for to replace certain aspects of, professional service staff, so people that sit in registration, admissions, and then you can go up to whether they could be used to replace certain aspects of teaching, like 101 subjects like maths or things like that, which is a massive ethical concern.
Sorry, I'm not. So, with regards to the last one, replacing, which is obviously the contentious one, right?
Yeah.
are you saying that this is going to happen, or are you saying people should work towards it?
No, I'm not saying people should work towards it at all. I think it's a question I have as well, that we have, because when we talk to academics, if we said the word automation, there was concerns around what that actually meant, and so that's where we try to engage people to see where they see automation and trying to allay their fears about how we envision academics, in this case, and anybody that wanted to be involved with any of the pilots as co-creators of it, so they have control over it as well.
Yeah, I mean, if I give you an anecdote back, I've been privileged to attend many conferences around the world, where lots of the commercial organizations who are developing such tools, in chatbots for sure, but also things like the so-called intelligent tutoring systems. And they have their half hour to do their presentation, and in their first 2 minutes they work really hard to argue very strongly that the teacher is really critical, and they want to make sure that they support the teacher. They then spend the next 28 minutes telling us how their technology is actually better than a teacher in XYZ different ways, and completely undermining that first 2 minutes.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean that is hugely typical. One of the biggest companies in the world, the CEO, remarked once that he saw the future where teachers would be like what he called KFC chefs, so Kentucky Fried Chicken chefs. Now, I don't know if you've been to a Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's a vegetarian like for many years, but I think chefs is perhaps a little bit of an overstatement of what they do. It's following those tight scripts, and seeing if they can move forward. The other issue that you mentioned that I wanted to pick up on was about designing for these issues. So, in other words, rather than building a technology and then getting it out there and then thinking about, well, hang on a second, what are the ethical issues and the implications on humans in the loop, etc. But instead of doing it that way, what we should be encouraging our developer colleagues to do is to start from the questions about what are the potential ethical implications, etc., of these technologies. So I just wondered, at Edinburgh, in your context, how does that work? Does it work? What do we need to do to make it work?
Well, I think so. From our examples, we started off the conversations with the academics and students, just try and figure out, both of us really, where automation would sit for them, and ethically, and I would say also compliance, regulatory compliance about data privacy and things like that, and accessibility. We were bit pretty hard for accessibility for a very standard basic bot, which wasn't fully accessible. So I think compliance is a massive thing that kind of gets ignored, and I think the university as a whole has learned some lessons about making sure the compliance is number one. And so for ethics, I don't know. For me, it's you could argue that you could design something that's ethically sound at the very, very beginning, but later on it might not be. Things will evolve, and this is, I don't think there's one golden conversation that you have and say, yes, we sign this off. I think it's just constantly reviewing about why it's being used, the value that it has, and the experience. And I think it's not just like you build something, you walk away from it and it's done. It's constantly reviewing and checking it and making sure that it is being used for what it should be being used for and not for anything else as well. But I think that's where compliance comes into it as well, to make sure it doesn't creep. So yeah, I might not have answered the question, but yes, I think there's not one golden magic. This is the ethics conversation. We will all agree to this. It's constant.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. The other issue that you brought up there, that you mentioned, is why. Why are we building this tech? So, how challenging is it to have that kind of conversation? When the funders are going one way, the academics are going a different way, the university wants to go another way. How brave do you have to be to say, well, actually, this technology is not right. We shouldn't do it.
Yeah, and I think we have to be brave and we have to be honest with it and say it's not right. But I think we have to have all our facts lined up to say it's not right and here's the reasons why. And I think if the initial conversations were a bit tense about it because it was, why do you want to do this? And it's trying to explain, for us it was very simplistic use cases initially, if this then that kind of scenarios, like branching scenarios, and then getting people to understand that and the role it could play in in low stakes, high volume kind of questions, and then we had the buy-in from that. But you're right, there's different demands, and I think that comes down to the values of the institution to say what are the demands and why are we doing this, and I think the values of the University of Edinburgh are always sure that the student experience and academics are the core thing. The technology should supplement that, and we believe that. And working with a Morehouse School of Education, it was definitely it was academics were assisting the technology department all the way, essentially creating the kind of the sessions to run them. It wasn't technology people that were running the sessions talking about technology. It was actually academics who were interested in how automation and aspects of AI could be used in education, leading those sessions. And we thought that was kind of key because I think if we stood up in the room, it could be quite dangerous and talk about this subject and try and lead it. So we really wanted the experts in the pedagogy to talk about it, and then for us to kind of fill in the gaps and answer the queries around, if we could do this, can we do this? Will this be compliant? And that's where we kind of sat in. So it was kind of a lovely network.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think that multidisciplinary approach, bringing in, and not just the academic, lots of my colleagues are computer scientists, and that's fine, but we also need the sociologists. You mentioned Ben Williamson. We need people like Ben in the conversation at the early stages to make sure that the difficult questions are asked, such as, should we really be doing this at all? Which I don't think, these projects can get very sexy and can lead us to do things that perhaps on reflection, perhaps we shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
And I noticed, I wanted to move on to participants now. So I noticed that George, Magulas, has put his hand up. So George, did you have a comment you wanted to throw in now? If so, please unmute yourself and go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, when I hear this conversation, I'm always, a bit confused because sometimes I feel the whole discussion about ethics and privacy is a bit, is done at the academic level, basically. What I mean is that from the moment you have a mobile phone and a smartwatch, there is no privacy. And people, use mobile phones and smartwatches, and they feel very, they are familiar objects, and they use them and they share data. And whilst we do that, and with just smartwatches and mobile phones, we can be monitored. Then we worry about the use of chatbots or other automation technologies in education and whether students will be willing to share information, etc. These students are the same people, who post their private information on the web and they share it, and they give all the details on social networks. So I don't know. I don't do work in chatbots. I'm here because I wanted to know how people use this kind of technology. how could be used in educational settings, basically, to get some ideas about how I could use it in my modules. But these are all issues that we think about privacy and data and GDPR and all these kind of things. Okay, I don't know. Is it really an issue? Are people we worry about, like our students, really interested in what we discuss? I really don't know. I have young kids and they use social networks, TikTok, etc. And, I try to somehow educate them on the use of this kind of technology. And I must say that, young people, I'm not really sure they pay any attention to all these issues we discuss. I don't know. Thanks.
Thank you, George. I'll give two quick responses and I'll hand over to Myles. First one, in the UK, they have these groups, all-party parliamentary group. So it happens in government, but it's non-governmental. And we had a brilliant presentation there. And the point was made that instead of worrying about how do we make things private, instead we should be focusing on how do we live in a world where data is no longer private. It's quite a subtle shift, but it's quite an important shift. That's the first thing I would say on one side of the argument. On the other side of the argument, I'm a parent, and when my children were young, I didn't let them play next to motorways and roads because there was the danger that they would accidentally run out on the road. I think the same is true of data. Just because my children are happy to give their personal information away for free on these systems doesn't necessarily mean I think it's a good idea and that we should allow it to continue. That's just two thoughts for me. Myles, what did you think?
Yeah, I would just say that if we're building anything, or if we are pointing students towards anything, then we've got to make sure that we have done and understand where the student's data is kind of going to, because if we don't, then we can come under severe scrutiny for not knowing where the data goes to. And I think we want to be as transparent as possible with students. And if they ask, or we can actually publish our data protection impact assessments to say, if you want to know where your data is going to, we can tell you. And I know that we ran a small pilot for a very simple emissions bot. And one of the aspects that we did on that is produce a DPA statement on the business school web pages saying your data is going here. It is this kind of data, and here's the lifespan of that as well. We just want to be transparent as possible, because I think you're right. Like someone said, people don't read TOSs, but that doesn't mean that we should just ignore them all and say no. You don't care about this, so you're not going to care about that. We just want to be, as an institution, it comes down to like our values. We want to be transparent with our students, that if we create something that they know where the data is.
Thanks, Myles. And Lars, you've got your hand up. Did you want to contribute to this particular discussion? We can't hear you. You're still on mute.
I thought it. Okay. So, hi. Yeah, it's somewhat connected. It was a question to Wayne and Myles here, or to the community as well. But it seems to be kind of a shift between not sharing much personal information to everyone shares everything. But I think I'm in the position that universities have a chance to lead by example of how to approach personal data. And so my question was a little bit around kind of, it seems to me to be of course many different questions, but one question is, what data are we collecting that can power new AI or chatbot experiences that would improve the student experience? The other question is basically, who can we trust with that personal data? For example, does it matter if it's Google or Facebook on the one hand that we provide personal data to, or the institution, the university, or kind of a more public sector body that we trust with the personal data? Do you have any opinions or thoughts around that?
Miles, did you want to come in on that?
I think for us, we just, I'm trying to think about tools that will collect data and like clicks, events, raw JSON about people clicking on our websites and IPs, your location, geolocation, things like that. Is that necessary for certain tools, or what's that being used for, and where's that being stored, and who's that being stored on to? So I think right now we are probably seeing an argument or more conversations about data privacy, about the tools that we use. I think, if you look at the hysteria about WhatsApp's privacy policy being updated 8 weeks ago and the mass migration of people to Telegram and things like that, I just can't see how we're not. We are arguing, we are having a more visible conversation around data privacy. And I think, like, I'll just speak on our behalf, is that we are pretty, it's our role to make sure that we're compliant with the regulations about where data is and transparency. And we have to make certain calls on whether we believe a tool is okay to be used at the university, maybe ethically, like online proctoring. Is that okay to be used? Where is that data being stored, and the level of data that's being used in online proctoring? Someone's home's being recorded, someone's audio in their home's being recorded. Is that okay? Do you know what I mean? There's lots of conversations about it. It's whether we trust. Who do we trust is up to the users. They have TOSs and privacy policies that they can read if they can understand them half the time, and if they don't contradict each other half the time as well. But for the institution's perspective, I would say that any tools that we want to use, we have to make sure that we have a full understanding of where that data is going and why it's going and why, what data is being collected. Because if we don't as an institution, then that's problematic because it doesn't match with our values. So yeah, sorry, that's me.
I think that's good. I think the other thing we must remember is that the renaissance of chatbots in recent years, one of the early tools was obviously the tool out of Georgia Tech, can't remember Watson anyway.
Jill Watson.
That's it, Jill Watson, thank you. And the point was that the big excitement there was that they had managed to trick all of their students into thinking that this was a human. Now, from an ethical perspective, I think that's quite worrying. And it kind of set the conversation off in the wrong direction in many respects. I'm conscious that John has done a couple of, John Brindle has done a couple of contributions to the chat, thank you, and has got his hand up. So John, over to you.
It was just really interesting because I attended a talk quite a few years ago now, and the person who's talking was a sociologist and with a specialism in digital data and things like that. And it's probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, so it was kind of pre this obsession with privacy a little bit. And his kind of argument was about, well, we have this data anyway, so why don't we do something cool with it? So we're kind of at a me stage with social media companies and lots of other things, and they know us. They know that I've been looking at Amazon at video games, and then I start getting lots of adverts for video games, but it's pretty stupid at the moment. And I think it's smarter use of data, and it's about looking at the way it's what we're using that data for, and whether we're using it for something truly beneficial. And it's taking that data and saying, you've got my data, I've given you it, you're a university, you've got all my assessment data, now show me what you can do with it. Do something that's going to impact me positively. And I think that's, if we can start to think of data in that way, then the ethics it doesn't disappear, but the ethical question kind of goes away because we're using it to positively benefit. It's not like Turnitin taking all our papers just to fuel our own repository to compare other students' papers to. We're doing something to positively impact the student, not monitor them and tell them how bad they are. I suppose that's my thoughts anyway.
Can I ask, how would you see that in terms of a chatbot though? How might that work there?
Well, I suppose it's the data. Chatbot's only as good as the data that you put into it, I suppose, and what you train it on. I think that point was made earlier in the chat as well. So how can we use a chatbot to access some of that information and provide comprehensive support to students? You know, I'm failing in this module. Oh yeah, I can see that your marks are like this. Well, here's some services that you can access to help you and things like that. So if we integrate it, because we look at learning analytics as disparate, separate projects to chatbots, and we look at it separate to research, and we look at it, so everything's so siloed in universities. It isn't mine anyway. You can probably see which university I'm at anyway. Yeah, but everything's very siloed, but we need to think more connected in terms of the way we use that data.
I would just come on that. I would just say, yeah, I think you're spot on, because I think I've always said that the chatbot's like the back door into learning analytics conversations, because it is prediction versus retention, and the merry-go-round that is that learning analytics, you know, benefits dashboards, you know, nudges, all that kind of stuff. And I always kind of say the chatbot is just the back door back into the space all over again, you know, like adaptive learning, like intelligent tutoring, all that kind of stuff, like Wayne said earlier on. So it's just what is cool. Do you know what I mean? And is it cool, or is it actually useful? Because if you sit in a group of people, 100 people, and you say, what's cool? You probably get a variety of what cool is. But I think you're right. I think we have that data, and we should be trying to look at ways of doing something that is beneficial for the students, but you know, letting the students try and maybe design, tell us what they want, and not us to define what they need, what we think they need, which is dangerous.
Okay, and I think the discussion around privacy and access to everyone's data, I never forget the time when Mark Zuckerberg was brought in front of Congress, and he talked about, well, it's really important that the data is free and accessible to everyone. And so one of the congressmen said to him, so are you prepared to tell us where you're staying tonight? And of course, he wasn't prepared to share that piece of data, which I completely understand. But it kind of, you know, hang on a second, there's privacy of data and there's privacy of data, right? Listen, I'm very conscious that Katja, I'm going to try Berner, I apologize, has been putting some really interesting comments into the chat window. I just wonder whether, Katja, you wish to join the conversation at all? No? Okay, no problems. Lars, over to you. You've got your hand up.
Oh, thanks. I think many of us are quite early stage in these discussions within our companies or institutions, but I know that AFTAB and Bolton College are quite far ahead in the actual adoption of these technologies. So I would be curious to hear how the conversation goes with you and your stakeholders, if you mind sharing, AFTAB. You might not be by the computer right now.
Yeah, I saw AFTAB.
Anyway, back to you, Wayne.
I saw AFTAB earlier. Listen, I'm going to read out a couple of Katja's comments. I didn't want to put her on the spot, but I think they're very useful. So earlier on, and this was in reference, I think, to George's comment, Katja wrote, we as educators are about raising the consciousness of the dangers as well. And I think that's an important thing. And so it's not just about making things freely available without worrying about it. It's actually thinking about what is our role as educators. And then later on, transparency is very important, trust building activity. So I think, you know, these kind of issues are going to run and run. And I think one of the things that we need to, a big distinction we need to make is between the pre-programmed chatbot, which, you know, are pretty common, versus the AI-driven chatbots, which are increasing quite dramatically. And the question is, you know, how do we ensure that if we just allow the AI chatbots to get their information by looking through the web or the university learning management system or whatever it might be, the problem that we're going to get there is exactly the same problem that we found in other uses of AI, which is that in building the biases, in building the misrepresentations from the very beginning. So the question is, how do we prevent that happening within an educational context? So, for example, we know that people from marginalized communities, be they from persons of color, be they from the LGBTQ plus community or whatever, the dialogue, the language is very, very different. The aspirations can be very, very different. But that data is not within the existing data sets because those people are either marginalized from it or they're a relatively small set of group of people. So how do we address that? That possibility for those inbuilt biases to really screw up our chatbots using education in the future.
That's a good question. I might not have the answer.
Does anyone want to have a go at it?
But it comes down to, like, I know our institution is trying to, equality and diversity, and trying to, trying to expand and improve to what it was. And but I think it's also the concerns regarding these technologies and social network platforms, the Californication of these spaces as well. And there is massive biases. But then again, how will we ever have something that's completely unbiased? So that's, yeah. I think it's a really interesting question, because even in teaching, you would argue that they're gatekeepers of knowledge that have maybe a set perspective on a certain topic. So you can say that they're naturally biased to this topic, but they don't talk about the other things because they might not, meet up with what they believe in. So you could say that the bot itself has been created with the best idea in mind, but it's just biased because the academic believes in this. So yeah, it's an ever-growing circle.
I've just seen we have Chris Dixon has joined us. Hi, Chris.
Greetings.
So we must have had a time issue, I'm guessing. Sorry, this session has been running for an hour, and we're just coming to a conclusion.
Oh. In that case, I very much apologise.
No need at all. No need at all.
It's definitely was at two. I'm just checking my diary. Yes, I had it down 2 till 3.
Yeah, you're right, but it's 2 to 3 European time, which is always one to get you, unfortunately. No.
That's all right, Chris. No worries. We had a great conversation here. I'm sorry you missed out on it, but it's. I hope that we get a chance to invite you to as a guest speaker at one of the upcoming webinars, so we can have a chance to get to know you and all the experiences you have with chatbots at Lancaster.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry again. If that's my mistake, I do apologise. I'm only sorry that I can't be sharing all of the good, amazing things that we've done and some live demos with my Alexa chatbot, which we could well have done. I'm as disappointed as I think you are. But yeah, but sorry again. It's my Britishness, British time
one of the webinars there.
Chris, we're literally coming up to the end of the hour, so I want to just give the opportunity back to you. So the question we've been talking about is the ethics and chatbots. So the question, so from your perspective, what would you identify as one or the other of the most pressing ethical challenges for chatbots, and how do you and your colleagues address that?
Well, very quickly, because we've got like a minute left. I think one of the biggest challenges as this sort of chatbot technology moves on and starts to offer the opportunity to sort of make decisions and point students in directions is who owns the kind of chatbot. We ran into issues of, if the best thing for a student for their welfare is that they leave the university and go and do something else, or they, make a course change or a course correction. Where does the university sit with that? Because we're taking kind of money from the student, and sort of who owns that relationship? Who decides what's in the best interests of the students if we're dealing with welfare? So I think that's one thing. I think privacy is another thing that we came up with when you're talking about sensitive data that students might have, grades, marks, those kind of things. How do we protect those? How do we give students permission? How do we make sure that we're not collecting data that we kind of shouldn't be collecting? There's some of the challenges that we've kind of come across, and some of those we've managed to sort of solve, and some of those we're still working through, I guess.
Chris, that was a brilliant answer in such a short space of time, unexpected. I really appreciate that. Myles, thank you so much for all your contributions, really, really helpful. Thank you very much to everybody in the audience on this session and the contributors. Really appreciate your time. So, Lars, back over to you.
And thank you, Wayne, for hosting this session here. I think this is a very important discussion to have, especially for us that have been working with chatbots for a while and starting to get perhaps too optimistic about the future role of it in education. So it's good to take a moment to reflect on some of the challenges, especially for someone who's quite optimistic as myself. So with that, we conclude this session here, and the